With coronavirus curbs over, Chinese tourists were traveling all across their country and abroad to celebrate the Lunar New Year this weekend. But first, reports show a lot less tourism than some businesses had hoped for. Planes full of Chinese tourists hit travel destinations including Bali, Thailand, or like here in Egypt for the first time in many months. However, after years of a virtual travel ban and strict measures to fight the spread of the pandemic, Lunar New Year revenues are expected to be far from the $250 billion that were spent on travel before COVID-19. All right, let's take a closer look at the matter with Fraser Howie, China analyst and author. Fraser, good to have you back on the program. So this is the first Lunar New Year after China loosened its zero COVID policy. The numbers may be lower, but is this travel likely to boost a struggling business economy, struggling traveling business?
Sure, of course, it's a restart. So and the quick answer is yes, you're going to get a boost, but it's going to be a limited one. You mentioned there the absolute number of trips are lower. That's both domestically and internationally. Internationally, the infrastructure isn't back up to full speed. The number of flights just isn't there. Remember, they basically fell to pretty much zero for practical purposes for the past few years. And countries around the region still have some restrictions on Chinese tourists. So it is a bit of a boost, but we're certainly not back to normal.
The number of coronavirus infections were soaring even before these celebrations. Won't they make it worse?
I'm not a medical expert, I'm not a biologist, but I don't see how it can't be made worse. You have an incredible mixing. I think it is the world's largest migration of people. Literally hundreds of millions of people on the move from the coastal cities to the provinces, from north to south, east to west. It's basically in complete flux. So you're certainly going to get greater spread into the rural areas, which have much poorer healthcare systems and much poorer access to antivirals and things like that. So the situation is going to get worse. The difficulty is the data is so poor and so opaque. We frankly have no good measure of any of the numbers around COVID now.
So the Chinese Center of Disease Control says there won't be a huge wave by these travels over the holiday season because 80% of the population have been infected in the most recent wave. How are we to interpret these numbers?
Frankly, I don't even know how they do that. They don't seem to be doing anything systematically to actually monitor what's going on. So these numbers, they're relatively, they're just pulling out there, frankly. The countryside is going to be hit. It was already spreading, of course. We know that Omicron spreads very easily. But also, I think this is an ongoing process. We know even in Europe or elsewhere that COVID cases remain relatively elevated. This is a disease that hasn't gone away. Countries have got used to living with it, but there are still long tail effects of this, and China is going to be no different. Remember, basically, the pandemic has really just hit China in the past couple of months. Yes, we know they had a major outbreak in Wuhan, and of course, that's where it started. But they've largely hidden from the virus for 3 years, and they're only where we are basically 2 or 3 years ago now.
Fraser, you mentioned that these infections are hitting the rural areas in China much harder than the cities because the medical system there in these rural areas is not as well equipped as in the cities. How are these communities then dealing with these outbreaks?
Frankly, they're dealing as best as they can. They're going to be turning to traditional remedies where possible. They're going to be using simple paracetamol and fever remedies rather than antivirals. But they're just going to, have to grind through it. It's very unfortunate. I think there's a complete failure on the part of the Communist Party to better prepare the country, better stock up on medicines, get better levels of vaccination. All that has been extremely poor and reflects very badly on the country and its leadership.
China analyst and author Fraser Howie, thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you very much.